Luke chapter 12, verse 13 onwards. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God." Rich toward God. Pastors use this parable when they want people to pay their taxes, tithes, and offerings properly. However, this parable is not about paying tithes. Jesus preached it to a crowd that paid their tithes and taxes properly. It is about money matters and teaches that our faithfulness with money matters. Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem to be anointed king, Luke chapter 9:51 onwards. However, his kingdom comes through his crucifixion. He will be a crucified king, a paradox and stumbling stone to the religious Jews. The religious Jews, Pharisees, and Jewish lawyers are waiting for a deliverer, a Messiah king who would save them from Roman rule. However, Jesus has come to deliver them from the dark power of hatred that lurks behind Rome: greed, lust, pride, and hate. Jesus and his disciples help people to obey God's law of love. Love God more than anything else and love others as yourself by removing demonic spirits from them. Right before this talk, Jesus tells the religious Jews who accuse him of driving out the devil with the devil, "If I do it by the finger of God, God's kingdom has come upon you." The Jewish lawyers exaggerate small mistakes of people out of proportion. They do not help anybody to obey the complicated Sabbath laws that they have made about harvesting on a Sabbath, about healing on a Sabbath, even with a little finger. They do not show mercy to their fellow Jews caught in their sins. Then they bribe people to escape excommunication from their synagogues. Jesus calls them greedy abusers while he is eating with them in a Pharisee's house. Luke chapter 10 and 11. Jesus now is preaching to a larger crowd. It includes Pharisees, Jewish lawyers, tax collectors, sinners, and his own disciples. And this is the Sermon on the Plain. Jesus preaches about being careful of the teachings of the Pharisees, who are hypocrites. They perhaps teach correctly, but do not practice what they preach. They pay their tithes regularly, but are not generous toward people who experience poverty, whom they neglect mercilessly. Meanwhile, a man, perhaps a younger brother, wants to know if Jesus would help him divide his father's property fairly. At the time, the older brother, the natural heir, would get 2/3 of the inheritance. Perhaps this younger man is dissatisfied with the division, or maybe he thinks Jesus, the fairness teacher, would reconsider their property division and help him. Jesus usually sides with the weak, so he may have thought Jesus would help his cause. However, Jesus has a strange response. Instead of taking sides, Jesus asks this man, "Who appointed you? Who appointed me a judge between you and your brother?" In a sense, Jesus invokes his role as a judge like Moses and God himself, as said by Moses in the Torah. God is the judge. Moses acts on behalf of God and delivers judgment for Israelites on contentious matters. Moses did judge such affairs between Israelite people, and Moses had said, "A prophet like me would come, and you must listen to him." Jesus is making a messianic claim here. He says, "I am that prophet about whom Moses prophesied." Perhaps Jesus wants his hearers to know that he is a judge like Moses and a judge like God himself, and he is the Messiah, the King. Still, he gives this man a unique response. He tells him and others who are with him to guard against every kind of greed. How is asking for a fair division of one's property greed, we might ask? But Jesus tells him, you have enough money still, but look around and see the poor people of Israel. I, the Messiah, has come to gather all the people of Israel, the Samaritans and the Jews alike. Even every person in the various strata of the Jewish society, the tax collectors, the sinners, the lame, the sick, the blind, the beggar, the widow, the orphan, the needy, every one of them. I have come to gather all these people who are God's possession back into God's fold. And how are you treating these people? Are you generous towards them? Are you merciful towards them? Are you going after the tax collector and bringing him back? Are you kind towards the poor, the sick, the weak, and the hungry? Look around. They have nothing. He wants this man to guard against this kind of greed. In Matthew 5, in a similar sermon on the Mount, Jesus tells his disciples to give more if someone steals from them forcefully. Thus you will shame them and expose their lust for money. Jesus tells them, you are not your possessions. You are more valuable than your possession. In my life, a similar incident took place a few years ago, and somebody wanted more money from me. God said, it was around 3 times more than what I owe them. God said, give it away. And I did it, and I have peace. Jesus is using this parable about the rich man to make his point. He says, a rich man had a great harvest. Now he had more than what he needed. He also had plans for his future prosperity and wise spending. However, he made a considerable calculation mistake. He did not want to die, but he did not realize how transient his life is on this earth. Jesus says, this is how God brings people who value money more than their lives to their senses. And this is how the lives of the people who are stingy with sharing with the poor people, God's people, would end. Nobody can carry anything to the afterlife. Therefore, be generous and kind to those who are in need. If so, God will reward you in the coming age. Immediately after the parable of the rich fool, he tells his disciples to beware of another kind of greed, worry. He tells them, do not worry. Look at the birds. They do not sow, they do not reap, but God feeds them. Won't he provide for you? You are more precious than the birds, aren't you? The Pharisees paid their tithes and taxes correctly. They accused Jewish traitors, the tax collectors, who would collect tax from poor Jews for the Roman government, of greed. However, Jesus exposes the greed of the Pharisees and accuses them of making unjust rules and not helping people follow them. Therefore, Jesus advises them that if they have brains, they must now show mercy to God's people, the deformed and the underprivileged, before it is too late. Perhaps God would relent and forgive their greed, just as he has forgiven the repentant tax collectors like Matthew, who now follows Jesus. Thus, Luke exhorts his hearers to show generosity to others if they think they belong to God's kingdom people. The message to us is simple. Pastors, are you helping people experiencing poverty as your own family? Lawmakers, are you making fair laws for people with low incomes? Teachers, are you teaching the truth with love for low-income people? Or is greed overtaking your heart? Do you worship God or money? America has much money, but they first want to know, if a man of God wants to come there, how much money do you have? I only wanted to study in America. Do you know why? Because only they have the excellent resources for New Testament studies. The church was in the Middle East, as we know, but now the original scrolls are in the West. They take money from the poor Easterner to teach him about another poor Easter man, Jesus, from Eastern scrolls. They expect Jesus to come. I wonder which Jesus they worship, money Jesus or God's Son. God bless you.